smaller blocks that intertwines with other smaller blocks encapsulates better cross-solidarity and framework of negotiation patterns. Because you don't force diversification in a larger circle that's strenuous to govern and easier to subjugate just by the sheer volume of state dominance, which is the problem that we have been forwarding from Joseph, we have been forwarding from Brent, which still gained no response from them. Because the first response that we got from side opposition is that, you don't have any specialization in your trades and resources. Therefore, it's going to be harder for you to gain leverages in this transaction as a regional bloc. The problem is that's untrue. Trade between regions happen. That's the reason why we have these trading patterns, because you can still intertwine with other regions in the first place. So the difference in our side is that you cannot do this marginally and arbitrarily. It needs to be decided by the region strat allocation. That's why it's easier for you to formulate a lot of strategic resources for this region, because you don't consolidate power to China, for example, who can outcompete your resources in Asia in other services and sectors that they can easily dominate. That's why we gain better control over the access to these trading patterns, and we also get the leverage of them consolidating these areas and actually creating negotiations within these regions to formulate a relationship that are far better and far more justiciable at a larger scale, because you force them to create and impose a survival metric that actually diversifies their own economy. So at this point, all of the cases coming from their side is simply untrue. But secondly, they said that it allows you to gain larger access to monopolies in this region because you can have one superpower in this region and they can easily dominate these areas. The problem with that contention is, one, it's symmetrical. It already happens within the global system that we have. And two, even if that's the case, then you can still outcompete them and outvote them by the sheer number of developing countries in your side. And also, I don't think that's going to be the case, right? You don't want your industry to fail simply because it weakens your regional trademark and it reaches the markers for your regional transaction. That's why superpowers in this regional system that we have been mentioning from time to time allows you to gain unrestricted access to distribution channels that you wouldn't have inside opposition, because you allow them to consolidate and you allow them to have a considerable partnership from time to time, in comparison to, like, maybe becoming more predatory, maybe becoming more anticipatory with your retaliated conduct by the incumbent by creating predatory pricing or exclusionary responses to other areas that don't allow you to prosper. First issue then, on the axis of regulatory efficiency and union of interest and purposes in both model. Our case in Gulf allows you to unlock the benefits that Op wants to suggest that they have, because their only impact in this debate is that maybe they will have more consolidarity, maybe they will have more regional access to all of the benefits that they want. But what happens in our counterfactual? It's clear from Joseph that right now in the status quo, you have a large asymmetry in access to all of this classification. It only takes one conflict from this Western monopoly, for example, which harms a lot of areas globally because you blanch out your own state from Far East, which is, we say, is still undemocratic right now. Because one, the problem with the voting system in Ops world is that, you are classified by the way that you value your own contribution in trades. In our side, you delimit this because you're valued based on your regional prosperity. Even if you are a developing country, you can thrive in the systems by the sheer number of votes that you have. Maybe if you are in a poor region, you have one superpower or two superpower states, for instance. You still allow those developing countries to renegotiate their terms and allows prosperous discussion because, again, you outnumber them in terms of regional voting strat. And secondly, you also allow more rich diversification in rich region, because if there are more superpower, then therefore it's easier for them to just simply help and subsidize this regional priorities, which breeds a lot of instrument for them to develop this industries that are still developing in the first place. So in our side, you gain less and less regional failures because again, a weaker region means that you have weaker trade marker. That's why superpowers don't want this. That's why they help building and provide. They help building these regions and provide subsidies that are necessary for their regionalism in the first place, or the regional blocks in the first place. Again, the problem under a WTO style regime is that obligations are formally universal but materially weak. This is me dealing on the second issue on the nature of obligation and formal rules versus effective enforceability. In their side, it only takes a one call out that you cannot really enforce them to follow all of the regional blocks that they have and to follow all of the compliance that they have in their global outline. Because again, you cannot force US, for instance, to be superior, to be compliant with all of your regulations simply because, again, they dominate these areas in the first place. That's why it's easy for them to bastardize any UN conflict, any UN adjudication, and they can just simply say that they have the reputational enforcement in the first place. That's why in your side, you may have this kind of quote unquote blockage, but the problem is it's going to be harder to enforce. That's why all of the impact that you have can be easily washed out by the call out of asymmetry. And second, they say that it's better because maybe you can gain centralized enforcement authority and credible punitive escalation. The problem in their side is that one, in our side, we cure all of this defect because you gain market access that becomes more contingent on compliance. You gain violation triggers that becomes more reciprocal in terms of trade. That's why at the end of the day, Bloc converts trade law from aspirational legality into an enforceable conditionality that wouldn't happen in their side of the house. At the end of this debate, you can see that I'm sorry, I don't have any outro, but yeah, very proud to oppose.